Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're here to start the second half of the day, so we'd like you to please come to the grow stage. We're preparing for a very cool panel, which will be about tools for developers. So I'm sure that all you developers would want to be here for this talk. It will be moderated by Philip Kendall from Scobbler, and it will feature Michael Wawra from Twilio. It will feature Martin Davis from SandGrid and Jamie Hannaford from Rackspace. So I'd like to welcome them to the stage. Let's give them a hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So guys, come up stage. Let's take some seats. So I'm really, really happy that we can do this session today, because I think those guys are helping you to build the next Twitter without needing millions of money and making it much cheaper for you. So I think it's going to be very interesting in what kind of tools developers can use. But let me first start by asking each of you to give a 1-minute introduction, who you are and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Jamie, I work at Rackspace. I'm a software engineer there, and I'm part of their developer relations group. So our task is to basically reach out and help support the developer community. So we speak at conferences, we write technical blogs, we have developer tools, and it's all about trying to make your lives easier and reducing barriers for entry. So that's in a nutshell.
Super.
So I'm Michael Wawra. I'm a developer evangelist at Twilio, and I actually do pretty much the same thing, just for Twilio. I go to conferences, write the blogs, write the content, and show people how they can improve their applications with communications.
I'm Martin Davis. I'm a developer evangelist at SandGrid, so I do very much the same job as Jamie and Michael. I look after developer relations for SandGrid here in Europe. I'm currently the only developer evangelist outside of the United States. We manage what the guys have said already. But there's a big focus within SandGrid on us managing the tools that developers are using directly. So that's a lot of work on the open source libraries and all of the stuff that we have on GitHub that allows people to interact with our product, but also going out and meeting people who are using it and getting their feedback, which we can put either directly back into those libraries or we can put it directly back into our documentation.
Okay, great. So let's kick off the talks a bit by talking about like the tool chains that developers should use to build their products. So let's start at looking a bit on the mobile world. So what is your take? What's like the perfect mobile tool chain for a developer look like?
I'm not particularly a mobile developer, but I think there are lots of tools out there. Google, just use Google and your brain, I think. Basically.
Okay, then maybe Rackspace. I think you do a lot of stuff in mobile. So, oh, sorry. But I mean, anybody else who has a take on what's like the best tool chain to use a good mobile development app to develop an awesome Android app, or what's the kind of the tools that you would suggest people to use?
My focus is generally on people tend to focus too much on what tools they're going to be using and looking at particular like hype tools or this was built using this, and so therefore I have to use that if I want to get the same kind of effect. But I don't necessarily think that that's true. I think that if you have an idea, there's enough tools out there now. So if you're not necessarily an Android developer, if you're not necessarily an iOS developer, you don't want to have to go through the process of learning those languages. And obviously, if you feel like you want to and that would be fun for you, then please go ahead and do so. But if you're looking for a way to get your idea from inside your head and into someone's phone, then there's a number of tools out there that you need to do it that aren't necessarily native to it. If you are a front-end developer and you build HTML and JavaScript, then you can build mobile apps in that way. Now, people will probably look at you and go, oh, you know what, you didn't build it native, so it's not going to be good. That's not necessarily true. And particularly when it's just a case of getting an idea out of your head and onto somebody's phone, then you use whatever tool set works best for you, the one that's going to make you feel the most comfortable as a developer. So, PhoneGap for the front-end developers has been really big, and I know a bunch of applications out there that are installed now that are actually built directly on top of that you can't even tell the difference between native and that because they've tuned it up so much. So I think, the short answer is, you go with whatever is going to make you feel the most comfortable and make you the most productive when you're actually going through that process. Not necessarily about what's going to be best for it or what other people say is best for it, just what is best for you.
Okay, so has anybody a take on how do you evaluate a tool? Because I think you're absolutely right that it makes sense to like look at the use case, but what you would give these people as a tip in like how to like evaluate if the tool is the right thing for the job? I mean, how do you usually go about that?
I think what I generally find is when I attempt to use any given tool, be it Xcode or Eclipse or whatever it is you're using for Android now, it's just about how comfortable I am and finding my way around it. There's always this thing I've often said about every time you get, or well, probably until recently, I don't know, every time you start using a new version of something like Microsoft Word, you already know where everything is because everyone's so familiar with it. And when you start coming to a new developer tool, if things aren't kind of where you expect them to be, especially in terms of an IDE, it's just like, ugh, there's kind of like a high barrier you have to get over to start using it proficiently. And what you want from a tool is something that's going to get out of your way and let you do the job. You don't want something that's got so much kind of like cruft and stuff that you've got to go through and menus and complexity and weird stuff that's in places you don't expect it to, that it's like, this is going to be a nightmare to work with. I mean, I will still write stuff using things like Vi or TextMate or whatever, or Sublime Text, because it just gets out of the way. But I'll also use Xcode because I'm familiar with it and I know where everything is.
Yeah. Did any of you have any particular tools that really made you much more efficient, something that you found recently that you want to share?
So I code quite a lot in PHP and Ruby. So one of the amazing IDEs I found recently is PHP Storm, and it's just an incredible development environment. I've fluctuated between V and Emacs, and then Sublime and Coda, and NetBeans, but they're all they had too much going on. But I think for PHP at least, PHP Storm is just incredible. And not just IDEs, like I use things like Vagrant, which is incredible. It basically allows you to virtualize boxes for development. So there's lots of development tools out there that are just designed to make your lives easier. So IDEs, virtualization like Vagrant are just incredible, I think.
Yeah. So let's go a bit from the tools maybe to the processes. So I mean, I think one of the key things that we've seen innovating in the last years is that people deploy things much faster and easier. So what is your take on automated build system, automated deploy systems, and how you would recommend people using them or not using them?
Just do it.
Yeah, I absolutely love stuff like that. Even if I have my own little projects, I've got a little Rails app that I've been building, and it's running with continuous integration. It's using Semaphore app for automated testing. It's using Code Climate for automated code analysis, and it's just it's so cool when you commit some code and suddenly you get these emails going, everything passed, everything works, it's all deployed, everything's great.
Build
Brilliant.
failed.
Yeah, well, occasionally.
So can you explain a bit how when you do this stuff, not on the specific tool level, but how do you set up a good environment that you can work efficiently to automatically deploy and build?
So what I've found is I look for tools that I can basically hang off GitHub, because it's very easy to have things that use the commit hooks and just run for you. So again, the two things I'm using, Code Climate and Semaphore, are both based on GitHub webhooks. So they just know when to do things. And the problem is at Twilio, obviously, we have much more substantial infrastructure, and I'm sure both these guys at their respective companies have a lot more infrastructure for doing this, but certainly when I'm just doing my own things, and from the point of view of kind of a startup-y type, you're very small, you don't have a lot of time to invest in these things, and a good continuous integration system is going to pay you back tenfold. But if you can get something going a lot quicker, then it's just going to be paying you back faster. So I think when you can just start saying, oh, we're just going to pay for this service, it's $20 a month, we're going to hook it up to our GitHub repos, and it just works. It's brilliant. It just kind of gets out of your way.
Sometimes you don't even need to pay for it. I mean, a CI tool that I use is Travis. So Travis CI basically takes all the hassle out of continuous integration, and they market themselves as a service. So it's no setup. It integrates completely with GitHub, and you have a full coverage of, if you make a substantial refactoring, you're fully covered. So the CI, you can also use Jenkins. You can set that up on a separate server, which continually polls your GitHub. But that's more CI. For continuous deployment, I would probably use something like Docker, which is it's like a Linux container that completely encapsulates your app. And it just handles all of it for you. And you can set it up to go off GitHub, and you can deploy it to your different production environments. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I think that's extremely important stuff, and I think that we cannot emphasize enough of how much time these guys will save, and I think there's great insights. So I think you should all take notes and check out all these tools that I mentioned, because I think that's really, really key to having an efficient development process. So how would you suggest the startups here, which are small companies, to basically come to a decision? Who in the company should decide what kind of processes and tools are used? I mean, what's your take on who should own that decision?
To start with, it depends on the size of the company, but if there's 4 of you, you should all make that decision, I think, because you have that luxury of being able to do that. You're still working together, you're still committing code to the same repo, you are still all working on the one big picture, and anyone making a change to that particular workflow is going to make a change to the workflow for 3 other guys. So generally, you all have to agree, that it's going to work well for you. As teams grow, different decisions can be made by different people. It depends, if you reach a point where in your company where you've got, say, people working on building the API layer and you've got people working on core product and that kind of stuff, then decisions can be made at different levels about what should be used. But, my feeling, and this, runs through kind of every software team that I've ever run, is that, unless you kind of come to a general consensus about a tool being right for the entire team, it's probably not going to work that well, because you'd always find people that will be a detractor from that. So I think it's a whole team decision, but obviously that doesn't scale. So there will be a point where, you have to kind of, stop being quite so precious.
Yeah. I think it's also worth saying that it's worth knowing sometimes that you can change tools. So if suddenly you start finding something isn't working for you and it's starting to get in the way, change it. It's not a big cost, and it's better than spending months and months basically yak shaving trying to get away from a problem you'll cause because you've had a bad tool selection. So don't like you say, don't be precious, and feel free to drop things.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key of like any agile process, that you can like fail and like change and do things new. I think that's like one of the key things in setting up all the processes. Okay, then I think we'll switch over to the APIs. So who wants to take a shot on why these guys here should, instead of building the stuff by themselves, use like APIs to build their businesses on, and what kind of the things that you think that like people shouldn't do themselves anymore?
Team size, again. And when you're starting out and you have an idea that you want to build, you're building it, with, maybe it's just you, maybe it's 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, small teams. You have that idea that needs to get out of your head and up somewhere as quickly as possible so that people can start using it. And so you can get people to tell you whether it works, whether it doesn't work, and you check the traction. You don't want to be spending a lot of time building things that you necessarily don't have to build. You want to concentrate on your minimum viable product. And from my point of view, that's when you probably will put the highest reliance on, not necessarily APIs specifically, but certainly APIs related to cloud services that will take away some of the heavy lifting for what it is that you're building. So for example, if you're building something for the first time and you need to send, a ton of email from it, then you would use SendGrid to do it, and plug in the API and be sending. If you wanted to send SMS, then you would do the same with Twilio. If you needed voice, then you would go to Twilio. You wouldn't build that huge email infrastructure or that huge telco infrastructure to start with, because it's not what you're trying to do as part of your business. You're trying to get something that relies on those things in order to actually grow that business out there, but you don't need to build those things because somebody else is taking care of that problem. And it's the same for any aspect of that. It's like, why build things that have already been done if it's not core to what you're making? Always focus on what is the MVP and what do you absolutely have to build. Anything that you don't absolutely have to build when you're starting, you can probably just push it out to somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's, you hit it spot on there. I think it's a case of picking your battles. If you're a developer, and you don't have a big development team, you can't do everything. You have to focus on your strengths, which is your product, and you sort of have to outsource all the subsidiary things to people who do that full time. And what you'll find is that the reliance on these services will pay dividends, because these are, if it's an open source project, for example, it's going to be backed by dozens, hundreds of developers who just dedicate their time to that one thing. So it's going to be incredible quality. And when it comes to things like security, if it's open source, then it has a lot more exposure to, to people publicly browsing. And I think that a patch, for example, would be a lot easier to implement rather than a very proprietary closed source system. So,
yeah, that's a very, very good point. So, but let's go a bit to the other side. I mean, we've seen that like Twitter has like screwed developers like big times by like basically killing a lot of businesses by shutting off their APIs to anybody who wanted to build a Twitter client. So what would be your advice in order to avoid companies building their business on somebody else's back and being screwed at the end time? So maybe.
So I think an important thing to differentiate between Twitter and certainly what we do at Twilio is that they weren't an API product. They weren't a developer product. They were, a micro-blogging service with an API that a lot of people started doing cool stuff with. And then they decided they wanted to take more control over how people were using things and, basically take away lots and lots of Twitter clones for iPhone or whatever. But if you go and actually talk to a company like, like Twilio, like SendGrid or Rackspace, whatever, who actually are an API providing company. What I am here to do is go and talk to developers to tell them they can build stuff with Twilio, and we've got their back. We are providing an API for them. It's not a secondary thing that we do. We don't do anything else. We do APIs, and that's what we're focused on. So we're trying to do that so that people can rely on us. So if you're going to back your business using someone else's API, make sure that API is what they do. It's not some fringe benefit they also offer so that you might use their platform or whatever else it is. That's what they do, and then you're likely to be able to build your business on it.
You would recommend people against building their business against like a Facebook or Twitter API if you rely on it?
I wouldn't go quite that far. I wouldn't go quite that far, but yeah, I think it's something you have to bear in mind, depending on what you're building against and what's likely to happen. I think obviously if you're going to build something that has a heavy Facebook integration, then that's probably not going to change that much. But on the other hand, Twitter did do that.
Yeah, so basically, have a redundancy plan. If you're very tightly coupled to a particular service and that service undergoes a massive overhaul, then that's extremely precarious. So I would just advise to have some kind of backup in terms of that reliance, I would say.
I think that's a very, very great point, and that leads me also then to the next questions. How do you avoid that people using your APIs, that they'll be locked in at you? Because you as companies have, of course, a high incentive that the people are locked in and cannot go away from building stuff when they're building stuff on your back. How would you recommend people when they're building stuff on your 3 platforms, and maybe each can individually answer that quickly, that they can also, if they decide it's not the right thing, move on to somewhere else?
I would use, so for example, if you're using a cloud provider like AWS or Rackspace, and you have functionality which you expect from the API, I would use an intermediary library that basically acts as like an adapter. So if you did change providers, you could easily change the adapters kind of thing. So you have an intermediary that sort of acts as a proxy kind of thing. So all of your code is using very generic languages, which allows you to switch between providers. There's lots of different things you can do.
Good.
I think that's probably the right architectural answer right there.
So have you seen customers switching off of your platform and doing that okay?
Not really. So for example, the developer tools which I talked about, a lot of them are multi-vendor. So the one that I work on, Ruby Fog, doesn't just support Rackspace and OpenStack, it supports Google Cloud, AWS, so all of that multi-vendor support is baked in to the library. So it allows people to easily switch if they want to. So there are options out there, and we do sort of cover the base just in case. But
Okay. You want to add something?
I've never known anyone leave us ever.
Because it's so hard, or because you love your product?
Yeah,
so
no,
much?
because we just have them so locked in at that point, it'd be terrible. No, I mean, particularly for what we do, which is, sending emails, so, SMTP services in the cloud. There are a lot of companies out there that do the same things, and I think it's really dependent on kind of the level of integration that people have got to. So if you're just going down that route, then actually switching out is very, very simple, right? At the very basic level, you're just changing some SMTP settings. You can get it deployed very, very quickly. I guess after that, there are the extension services that we offer as well. So, aspects of analytics and, real-time information about what's being sent out from your account and that kind of stuff. And, if you're built in, to quite a deep level, then, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to strip that away. But at the same time, you could do it in phases if you need to. But then, no one's going to leave because they're all happy with the service, right? That's the point.
Awesome. I'll trust you on that one.
Thanks.
Okay, so then let's talk not so much about the critical stuff, but let's talk about like a really amazing success story. I mean, can you give us, from Twilio especially, I would be keen, can you give us an example of somebody who's built $1 million business on back of your platform? Do you have any good example of some guys who got really rich doing that?
I can't think of one that I can tell you about. There's been quite a few good stories we've had. We do see a lot of people using Twilio at hack days, for example. And I'm pretty sure we've seen a few guys who've actually gone to hack days, made things like disposable telephone numbers, things like that, and then go on to actually get more than $1 million in funding for what they actually made at a hack backed on Twilio, which obviously is really cool.
Okay, well, that's very good. Anybody else who wants to share a success story?
I mean, we send emails, right? So no one's going to build something off that directly does it. But I think what we can say is that we've supported massive companies in extreme levels of growth to the point where they are, like extremely high value companies now. So, we've handled the sending of email for companies like Pinterest and Spotify and Uber and Foursquare throughout their growth. So from when they weren't really sending anything at all to doing, tremendous amounts of mail. So for example, last month through SendGrid, we sent 10 billion emails. And, that's no small amount in any way, but there's a lot of companies there that, have started out by sending, 2, 4, 5 emails a day that now send tens of millions a day. And we've been there scaling with them throughout that entire thing, and they've never had to change anything that they do. So the support we've given them is that they've been able to concentrate on building their business and their product up to where they are now with their super high valuations and the tens of millions of users, because they haven't had to have their engineers going off and trying to fix this particular problem around email over any particular time. So, no, not directly, but we've been there to support to make sure that actually, they haven't had to worry about one particular thing and concentrate on what they do.
Yeah. I mean, scalability, what you mentioned, is I think one of the key things why I use platforms, because if other people do the hard work for you, then it's much easier. So do you see a trend, or is it like a strategy that you follow that people should be able, like even if they're just junior or medium level developers, to build like really big stuff? I mean, is that something that you see happening, or do you still see that your developers are really the hardcore guys?
You mean in terms of the strategy for scalability kind of thing?
Yeah, for the people building stuff on top of Rackspace, for example.
Well, I think it's incredibly important to plan well before you launch into a product, but there is also a danger of over-engineering before you begin. So I think it's just a case of being very sensible with the infrastructure you select, and knowing that you are basically choosing a provider like Rackspace or OpenStack, which can support you as your business grows. So if you're just a very small startup, you have very essential services like compute, like CDNs. And as you grow, and you could explode with popularity, you have things like autoscaling and load balancing. So there's lots of different services which you can add on, which don't require you to pre-plan kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So then let's go a bit back to the API things. I mean, especially at Twilio, what do you do in order to build like APIs that are really rock solid? And how would you recommend the audience, if they're going to build their own APIs, on how they're going to go about that? What's some best practices?
So I think the most important thing with building an API is friction. So when you start using a new API for the first time, whatever it is, if you find you can go to whatever.com, register on that website, and then start building with that API very, very quickly. So, my first experience with Twilio, I'm like, okay, I've sent SMSs with a computer before, and it took me 2 weeks or whatever with an SMS modem. I registered for Twilio, and I sent an SMS, and it took me a few minutes. And I'm thinking, okay, now I want to play with this more. And now I work for the company, right? So that clearly worked well on me. But I think if you do have that sense where you can just pick it up and get going with it, and there's no friction, you don't have to fill out forms and submit stuff and wait for them to email you things back, and lots of complicated stuff going on, then it makes it really easy to build a rock solid API that people are going to start using, because it's just so much easier for them to start using it, and then you can see what they're doing, how they're using it, and how it works out.
So how long does it take to get started with SendGrid? Because you said like 5 minutes to send an SMS with Twilio. So how long does it take to send my first email with SendGrid?
So I actually did this yesterday with something I was building, and if you go through a service like Heroku, for example, and you go and just do, Heroku add-ons, add SendGrid starter, that's it, because it adds everything in there for you. So actually you can be up and running in less than a minute.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. I'll try that later. And let's see if I'll succeed. I didn't develop for a long time. I guess it'll take me a bit more than 5 minutes, but nevertheless. So then, like one final question, because it's of course like a very, very hot topic. So what are you guys' take on Ruby on Rails? Is that the next hot thing that everybody should be following? I know we discussed it for a few years, but nevertheless, I'd like to have like one short answer from everybody.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, that's
it's just, it's incredibly useful for developers. It reduces speed, it makes you more productive, and it makes your web app a lot more robust, because all the features are there. They're already baked in, so you save time, basically.
So I love Ruby. Most of what I do now is Ruby-based, but I definitely think there's scope for the right tool for the right job. And I think for a lot of what I do, which is very quick, stuff that I put together. Brilliant. But I'm sure there are other equally good tools, and you should just, go with what you like.
Okay, so we have yes, maybe, and
It has its detractors, but I'm going to say yes because I've built 2 major production applications for 2 massive major record labels, and they're both built on Rails. So yes.
okay. So Ruby on Rails build stuff on the cloud, and they all get very rich in here, right?
Yes, that's the plan.
Okay, then thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, please stay for some questions. We're not letting you go anywhere just yet. Are there any questions for our guests on stage? Okay, we have one here.
I'm Felix from One Communication. I was wondering about the IDEs you said about PHP Storm, but you never mentioned the Zen Studio, and I was wondering what's your opinion about it?
I think Zen Studio is pretty cool. I went to ZenCon a few weeks ago, and the whole Zen company were there, and they're really trying to push Zen Studio. I think there's a particular use case for it. If you really want an all-encompassing environment for that, it's great. But if you want to pick and mix different products, like, for example, if you want Apache, if you want lots of different things which you think might be better for your app, then it's probably a good idea to go down independent products rather than an all-encompassing environment. So it really depends on what you need, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Don't be shy. We know we have a lot of developers in here. But if you have no other questions, thank you so much to all of you. And you can catch them during the coffee break later. Thank you so much.